the way that we perceive our environment, the process by which we take in information and organize it and ultimately make a judgment on what it is that we're seeing, is really dependent on a large process that has lots of feedback loops. For example, something grabs our attention, whatever it is, something that's moving fast, something that's moving slow, something that's out of the ordinary or novel, and then we try to organize what we're seeing and try to understand it. We put an interpretation on it based on our past experiences and based on the way that it fits in within the structure of our own experiences. We retrieve that information, we plug it in to, a place in our brain that's sort of a placeholder that really helps to give us some understanding of what we're looking at, and then we make a judgment on the thing that we're observing, whether we think it's good or bad, or we're indifferent, or it's something that we need to act on, or it's something that we need to ignore. But whatever the judgment is, we make it. But this is an ongoing feedback process, and every single time we retrieve something, and it might be new or novel or different, we might change what brings things to our attention. We might change how we organize it, we might change in how we interpret it, etc., etc. So the whole point here is that once we get a stimulus of some sort, whatever that is, our brain and our past experiences and our personality and things like this influence how we ultimately judge what it is that we're seeing and then make a decision on how to act upon it. So as you can see from this next slide on the things that influence perception, there's three major categories. One is the characteristics of the perceiver, and as I've already mentioned, our individual differences and our experiences will frame the way that we see things. So we don't just perceive things in a vacuum, it's usually perceived within the lens of who we are, what our personality is like, what our values are, and what experiences we've had in the past that may influence that. Then there's the stimulus itself that influences us, and that's certainly the thing that may get our attention in the beginning of the process. Something that is more intense in sound or color or whatever, or sensation, whatever that might be. Things that are in contrast are more likely to get our attention than things that are the same. So if we see something that is contrasting and a little bit different, that's the thing that gets our attention. The more that we frequently repeat something, the more it sticks in our head. So, the old commercial, head on, put it directly on your forehead, and they repeat this multiple times in the commercial, and you're annoyed by it, but it made you remember it. Whether or not you actually want to use the product is a separate issue, but you do remember the commercial. You do remember it because we know that, the more that we repeat something, the more it's likely to stick in. So if you listen to commercial radio, it's the same sort of thing. We hear the same songs over and over and over again because the more frequently people hear it, the more likely they are to recall it, to want to buy it, to say that they like the song. And that's, of course, what all the radio and record companies are interested in, is having us buy their records and CDs or digital songs, MP3s, however the format is these days. They want us to buy their music, no matter how we slice it. Things that are novel, things that are different, that we've never experienced before. Something brand new and exciting is going to get our attention. Something that is larger is much more likely to get our attention than something that is smaller. And then something that is in motion is more likely to get our attention than something that is at rest. Lastly, the characteristics of the situation, either the primacy of the experience, the recency of the experience, or the scripts and schemas we develop around certain experiences influence how we perceive things. And so when we talk about primacy, imagine that you walk into your organization the first day at work and you meet somebody who you really like, and so your impression of them and perhaps even your impression of the organization from day one sticks with you, that this is a nice place to work and I really like these people. A year later, that primacy effect, that initial experience you had, sticks with you, and you remember, wow, that was really awesome, and even though there's been some ups and downs, I still really like this place. The recency effect is basically the same idea, but it's where the more recent experience is what influences. So if, let's say, you had sort of mediocre entry into your new organization, and then, towards the end of your first year there, something really, really bad happened, and then you kind of look back and you think, well, it was okay, but man, this last thing is the thing that really sticks with me. And that recency effect is the thing that might persuade you to either stay with the organization or perhaps to leave. So that recency is always a challenge there. Lastly, we have the schemas. And what a schema is the way that our brain organizes things and to put it into some sort of order so we can make sense of it. And so a typical schema is our morning routine. We get out of bed, we check our phones, we go to the bathroom, we brush our teeth, we take our shower, we go out, we put the coffee on, we drink our coffee, we eat our Rice Krispies, we walk out the door after we pet the dog on the head, and we hop in our car and we take the same route to work every day. And I'm sure we've all had these days, and I know I have as well, where you're so tired or you've been so busy that suddenly you are aware that you got to work and you don't remember the trip in. And that's because we're engaged in a schema. We know where we need to be, when we need to be there, and we just follow the same pattern of behaviors over and over again. And schemas are a really easy way for us to repeat behaviors without having to put a lot of conscious effort into it. It's kind of like building a habit, for all intents and purposes. As I said earlier, individual differences have a huge impact on the way that we perceive things. And here are some examples of the kinds of things that make up individual differences. Our abilities, whether they are physical or cognitive abilities, but our abilities differ from person to person. And so because they differ from person to person, each one of us has an individualized, unique mix of abilities and personalities, attitudes and values and learning styles that influence the way that we perceive things. So personality, also important. Attitudes about things, our attitudes about work, our attitudes about our surroundings, that influences us, what our values are, and certainly the way that we take in and learn things also is going to influence how we perceive the world. So as I said, our abilities, our cognitive, our physical, or our psychomotor abilities are the things that influence the way that we perceive things. And in fact, psychomotor abilities is about how we assess a situation and then we react physically to what we are assessing. So it's kind of a combination of both the cognitive ability to perceive things and the physical ability to be able to manage our body and to react to things appropriately. You might see a psychomotor ability test for a police officer as they are assessing whether or not a perpetrator may be at risk. We're at risk because of a perpetrator, or whether it might be an innocent person there. So part of the simulations that police officers go through is having to assess a scenario and determine whether or not there's a risk or whether or not they shouldn't be able to move on. And so our abilities, the more we're able to entrust in our physical abilities, the more apt we are to perceive something to be safe or not safe. And the same thing with our cognitive abilities. The stronger our cognitive abilities to assess a situation, the more confident we become in our ability to perceive something and to adapt and to move on. And obviously the combination of the two would work really well together. But when I don't feel very strong physically or even cognitively, I don't trust my own judgment. I don't trust what I'm seeing. I don't trust what I'm perceiving and how and why I'm perceiving it. So it may be more challenging for me then to act. So our individual abilities clearly influence the extent to which we perceive something and how the label that we put on it.